What happened in Fort Macleod, Alberta on June 11, 2025 was absolutely explosive. Premier Danielle Smith walked into what was supposed to be a routine town hall meeting about coal policy, but what she said next ignited the room in a way that nobody saw coming. 500 people, ranchers, farmers, and local residents dressed in their cowboy hats, belt buckles, and jeans, packed that community hall, and when Smith delivered her controversial statement about finding middle ground solutions to allow for industries to proceed, the entire room erupted. The heckling was so intense, the competing applause so chaotic, and the anger so palpable that you could literally feel the tension through the walls. This wasn't just political disagreement. This was raw, unfiltered fury from Albertans who felt completely betrayed by their own premier. Before we break down exactly what Smith said that caused this absolute meltdown, smash that subscribe button, because this story reveals something much bigger about what's happening in Alberta politics right now. Hit the like button if you want to see more deep dive analysis like this, and drop a comment below telling me what you think about Smith's handling of this crisis. To understand why this town hall turned into such a powder keg, you need to know that this wasn't Smith's first rodeo with controversial statements. Throughout her political career, she's made headlines for embracing what critics call extreme and inflammatory rhetoric. From her comments during the pandemic to her Alberta Sovereignty Act proposals, Smith has built a reputation for saying exactly what's on her mind, regardless of the political consequences. But what happened in Fort Macleod was different. This time, she was facing her own supporters, people who had voted for her, and they were absolutely furious. The coal policy debate in Alberta isn't just about environmental concerns. It's about the future of entire communities that have built their livelihoods around resource extraction. When Smith stood up in that packed community hall and suggested that Alberta needed to find compromise solutions that would allow coal development to continue while reducing environmental impact, she thought she was offering a balanced approach. What she didn't anticipate was that both sides of this debate would see her statement as a complete betrayal of their positions. The environmental activists in the room heard her words as a green light for continued coal mining in sensitive areas, including the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. They've been fighting for years to protect these pristine watersheds from industrial development, and Smith's talk of middle ground solutions sounded like code for allowing coal companies to destroy irreplaceable ecosystems in exchange for economic benefits. On the other side, pro-development residents heard something completely different but equally infuriating. To them, Smith's emphasis on reducing environmental impact while allowing development sounded like she was caving to pressure from environmental groups and potentially putting unnecessary restrictions on an industry that provides jobs and economic stability to their communities. They wanted full-throated support for coal development, not qualified compromise. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Smith's statement revealed a fundamental political miscalculation that could cost her dearly in future elections. She walked into that room thinking she could thread the needle between competing interests, but instead she managed to anger everyone simultaneously. The heckling that erupted wasn't just from one faction, it was from across the entire political spectrum of attendees. The visual of this confrontation was absolutely stunning. Picture this: a room full of 500 Albertans, many wearing the iconic symbols of Western Canadian culture, those cowboy hats and belt buckles, turning on their own premier with an intensity that political observers described as unprecedented. Placards were waving, voices were raised, and the competing applause created a cacophony that made it almost impossible for Smith to continue speaking. What makes this even more significant is the timing. This town hall happened during a period when Smith is facing multiple political crises simultaneously. Her government has been dealing with healthcare controversies, including criticism over her attacks on Alberta Health Services management. Just months earlier, she faced accusations of trying to influence U.S. interference in Canadian federal elections, which her office vehemently denied as offensive and false. The coal policy controversy is particularly explosive because it touches on fundamental questions about Alberta's economic future and environmental responsibilities. The Eastern Slopes region that's at the center of this debate provides water for millions of Albertans and supports crucial ecosystems. Coal mining in these areas isn't just an environmental issue. It's about the long-term sustainability of Alberta's water supply and agricultural sector. Smith's attempt to find middle ground reveals a deeper problem with her political strategy. Throughout her career, she's built support by taking strong, uncompromising positions that energize her base. Her Alberta Sovereignty Act, her opposition to federal policies, her criticism of pandemic health measures, these positions worked because they were clear and decisive. But on coal policy, she tried to be a diplomat, and it backfired spectacularly. The reaction in that Fort Macleod community hall also reflects broader tensions in Alberta politics. The province is caught between its traditional identity as a resource extraction powerhouse and growing pressure to transition toward more sustainable economic models. Smith's government is trying to navigate this transition, but events like this town hall show just how difficult that balancing act really is. What's particularly telling is how this confrontation fits into Smith's broader pattern of controversial statements. She's previously faced criticism for comments that critics describe as extreme or inflammatory, including statements during the pandemic that led to angry protests at the Alberta legislature. The difference is that those previous controversies typically involved Smith taking strong positions that energized her supporters. This time, her attempt at moderation left everyone feeling betrayed. The political implications of this town hall disaster extend far beyond coal policy. Smith is already facing challenges from multiple directions: federal-provincial tensions with Mark Carney's new government in Ottawa, internal Conservative Party dynamics, and now this very public demonstration that she's losing control of her own narrative in Alberta. Environmental groups who attended the meeting saw Smith's comments as proof that she's still fundamentally committed to resource extraction over environmental protection, despite her talk of finding balance. They pointed out that any compromise that allows continued coal development in sensitive areas is unacceptable given the long-term environmental risks involved. Meanwhile, industry supporters and rural Albertans who packed that community hall heard Smith's emphasis on environmental considerations as a sign that she's abandoning the pro-development stance that got her elected. They want a premier who will fight unconditionally for Alberta's resource industries, not one who talks about finding middle ground with environmental activists. The intensity of the reaction also reflects deeper frustrations with political leadership. In Alberta, many residents feel like they've been promised strong representation of their interests, but instead they're getting political calculations and compromise positions that satisfy nobody. The heckling and competing applause in that community hall was an expression of that frustration boiling over. Smith's handling of the confrontation itself became part of the story. Witnesses described her as appearing surprised by the intensity of the negative reaction, suggesting that she and her political team had seriously miscalculated how her message would be received. This kind of political misreading doesn't just affect one policy issue, it raises questions about the government's ability to understand and respond to public sentiment. The coal policy debate is also complicated by federal-provincial tensions. With Mark Carney's federal government pursuing aggressive climate policies, Alberta's coal industry is facing pressure from multiple directions. Smith's attempt to find a middle ground position may have been motivated by recognition that uncompromising pro-coal stances could lead to federal intervention. But that political calculation backfired when it angered her own supporters. What happened in Fort Macleod represents more than just a bad night for Premier Smith. It's a symptom of deeper challenges facing conservative politicians trying to balance traditional resource extraction constituencies with growing environmental concerns. The fact that 500 people showed up to a town hall about coal policy demonstrates how deeply invested Albertans are in this issue. The aftermath of this confrontation will likely influence Smith's approach to future policy announcements and public engagements. Political observers are watching to see whether she doubles down on finding compromise positions or returns to the more confrontational style that initially brought her to power. For environmental activists, the angry reaction to Smith's compromise language provides evidence that there's significant public opposition to continued coal development, even among traditionally conservative rural communities. They're likely to use this confrontation as proof that Albertans are ready for stronger environmental protections. Industry supporters, on the other hand, see the negative reaction as evidence that Smith needs to take stronger pro-development positions and stop trying to appease environmental critics. They want a premier who will fight unconditionally for Alberta's resource industries without qualification or compromise. The visual impact of this confrontation, 500 angry Albertans in cowboy hats confronting their premier, will likely become an iconic image in Alberta politics. It represents the kind of grassroots political engagement that can make or break political careers, and it demonstrates that Smith's political future depends on her ability to rebuild trust with constituencies that are currently feeling betrayed. What makes this story particularly significant is that it reveals the limits of political triangulation in highly polarized environments. Smith thought she could find a position that would satisfy competing interests, but instead she discovered that some political debates don't have middle ground solutions that work. Sometimes trying to please everyone results in pleasing no one, and that's exactly what happened in Fort Macleod. The long-term implications of this confrontation extend beyond Smith's political future to broader questions about how Democratic leaders can navigate complex policy issues in polarized political environments. The coal policy debate in Alberta represents the kind of challenge that political leaders across North America are facing as they try to balance economic and environmental concerns in an era of climate change and political polarization.